Oh no, okay. Listen. If I fail miserably, then expose me. I don't know.
Or Daniel took a really long pause, but I think we're good. Segment 2.
Sam, be a goldfish. Little conclusion, wrap up.
All right, podcast. We ready to go?
Welcome to the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast, a show dedicated to modern learning and development. With your hosts, Daniel Mendonca and Scott Babcock.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm Scott Babcock, and I'm joined by your co-host, Daniel Mendonca. Daniel, it was Star Wars Day yesterday, and I'm super excited. The puns are going to be flowing. How are you today?
Today's a pretty good day. I know most people will be listening to this on a Thursday, so it'll be May the 6th, but I'll tell you, it's a big week this week. We got Star Wars Day yesterday, which obviously gets Scott very excited. Today is Cinco de Mayo, which brings out my favorite beverage, which is tequila. I also like tacos and burritos and other Mexican-style cuisines. It's also my mom's birthday this week, and it's Mother's Day. And as we know, Mother's Day, very important in a new mother household, which is what mine is.
Yeah, when is it no longer the new mother household? I mean, I feel like you're a year in. You're becoming veterans at this whole parenting thing. So, and happy birthday to your mom, by the way. There we go. So Star Wars Day was fun. Mother's Day's around the corner. Lots going on this week. Really excited for all of that. And as we all know, I get super jazzed about all of things Star Wars. And so yesterday's my favorite day to just sit and cruise the internet looking for great deals on crap I don't need, and reading all the fun stuff. And then a new show on Disney Plus that I'm sure we'll probably mention as well coming out yesterday. So, but yeah, we thought it'd be fun. Let's start off with a little quiz. Sabrina did some Googling and found a series of questions that she wants to rapid fire see if we know the answers to on my favorite series of all time. And Daniel seems to enjoy them as well. So without further ado, we'll put Sabrina on the mics and let us answer some fun Star Wars trivia questions.
All right, rapid fire, ready? First up, what's Baby Yoda's real name?
Grogu.
Oakley is a big fan of Grogu, by the way. Big fan.
But he'll always be Baby Yoda.
Yes, it's true.
Where did Obi-Wan take Luke after his birth?
Tatooine. Mos Eisley, more specifically.
That I did not know. I did not know the details. So Scott, well done.
To Aunt Veru and Uncle Owen on the moisture farm. No, all of us, nothing.
I know that side of thing. I just didn't know this.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I might butcher this name. Who is Palpatine's granddaughter?
Palpatine. That's from the new movies.
Oh.
Palpatine's
kind of a disappointing story arc in my mind, but you got that one, Daniel?
Is Rey.
It's Rey.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I do like Rey as a character, but I think her like you said, her arc disappointed.
Yeah, it kind of she was a good character.
They're like, yeah, it's great, and they started her well, and then it's like Palpatine's granddaughter, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, it was like sometimes just the package is a little too neat with the bow, and they just sort of tied it up a little too easily. I think. Anyway,
very very Disney.
Yeah, very Disney. Yep, for sure.
All right, who was Anakin Skywalker's Padawan?
Ooh, good one. Also in the more recent shows.
Yeah, Ahsoka Tano.
Yeah.
I'm
very nice.
I actually have my Mandalorian This Is the Way t-shirt on today. And off the new show, kind of springs off of Clone Wars, which Ahsoka Tano stars in. Well, it's an animated, so you don't really star in an animated series, but definitely in it. Bad Batch, Disney Plus.
Yeah, I'm actually in the process of going back through the Clone Wars. I don't think I actually watched the final season, so I just figured why not start from the beginning, just so I'd be ready for the Bad Batch.
Awesome.
All right, last quick question. What is Mando's real name from The Mandalorian?
Ooh, yep. She might have got us stumped on the last one. I should know this.
Jin. It's Din Djarin.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel pulling us out in the win, closing us out.
Big W. Excellent.
Very nicely done, Sabrina. All right, a fun start to our show today, but that is not what we're going to be talking about. So this month, we've been on sort of a theme monthly. We did creativity and we've done community. This month is all about momentum. So as we're reaching closer and closer to the middle of the year, we thought it'd be good to talk about how do we keep momentum going. That'll sort of be the topic for the month. How do we keep your learners engaged? How do we keep them motivated to keep moving down the path of their learning journey, to keep developing and excelling on their skills? And today we want to focus a little bit on some of the ways microlearning can build up that momentum for your team and the ways it can sustain it. We haven't talked microlearning in quite some time. We were going back and looking. It's been almost a year, believe it or not, since we last sort of dedicated a whole show to microlearning. So we thought it's a good chance to bring it back up, introduce it to some of our newer listeners, and keep the topic and conversation going. So let's go ahead and get started.
All right, well, I get to kick us off today. I'm going to rewind it back. I think episode 2 or 3, probably about a year ago, was on microlearning, and just want to give a quick refresh on the definition of microlearning. By the way, one of my favorite learning and development topics to chat about, because it just intertwines the objective so well. So definition of microlearning, getting very by the book. Microlearning deals with relatively small learning units and short-term learning activities. The term is used in the e-learning industry and in related fields in a sense of learning processes in mediated environment. It's a holistic approach for skill-based learning and education, which deals with, like we said, small learning units. Scott, from a definition perspective, like what does that mean to you, and kind of how do you see that?
Yeah, as you're reading the definition, and I was thinking this over a little bit in what the last year has brought us. I think there's some revolution here, but we can talk about that a little bit more in depth. But in terms of what it means, I usually am a proponent of, as culture sort of shifts us to shorter and shorter attention spans or wanting things a bit more in the now, fast paced. One of the things is, how do you look at your content that exists today? And it's not about breaking it down to a certain minute count or slide pages or something like that. But how do you take your content now and just make it more digestible? So how do you break it into smaller and smaller units to get to a place where users are able to consume it quickly? And again, could be a minute, could be 5 minutes, could be 10 minutes, just depends on what your original training was. It could be breaking an hour-long training down into 6-10 minute segments, makes it more micro learning, and letting folks focus on a smaller set of objectives ultimately is really the goal, so that they can consume it and then they can move on. It also gives them greater reference points. We can talk about some of that as well. But it's really evaluating what you have today and figuring out, are there logical ways to break it up and make it something that can be reviewed more easily, can be taken more quickly in between activities or other job responsibilities. For me, that's the way I look at micro learning. It's not necessarily meeting a certain set of standards in the course.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. I also think that microlearning, as it's grown and evolved, I think one of the topics we always talk about is whether it was here to stay, or if it was a fad, or if it was just that term that's out there. I think microlearning really falls into the category of delivering content to your learners the way they want to take it in. If you think about the content that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, so if you think about social media, you have Twitter, 280 characters, used to be 140, but bite-sized chunks of content, micro blogs, they originally called themselves. You have Instagram, which from 30-second videos max. Obviously watches can be longer, but your stories are 10 seconds pieces of content and stories. TikTok, maximum of a minute. Everything we deal with on a day-to-day basis from a consumption perspective is in micro chunks. It's short, bite-sized pieces of content. Even with shows nowadays, you're seeing more and more shows that may have been movies in the past, right? That would have been 2.5, 3 hour movies, but now they're 6-episode series because they can deliver them on Netflix or Hulu or Crave or HBO Max or whatever it is in 20-minute episodes, and kind of tell a story over a longer period of time. So it really, I find microlearning to be kind of a modern way to deliver information the way learners appreciate it the most, or want it the most, or at least is kind of in their wheelhouse, which allows to reduce the friction of delivering your learning objectives right from kind of the kickoff.
Yeah, and when I think of microlearning, I think there's always sort of two driving factors, and you hit on one of them, which is form factor, right? So what your platform allows and what your users are generating themselves, which is a nice tie into our past episodes. Really, is that when we talk TikTok, Facebook, uh, Instagram, Twitter, all of that, you're really talking about user generated content, which is a nice way to think about it. So the things we deliver to each other is very micro in consumption. It is things that are going to be fast, flip through. You may spend forever in TikTok just flipping through video after video after video, but each video in and of itself is a very small delivery window. The other thing that I think drives this historically, this move or this movement into micro learning, is a business's desire to reduce the friction point of doing your job while also getting trained. So in between customers or in between stocking a shelf or whatever, can you consume 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes of content rather than sitting down for a 30-minute e-learning? And that would be one of the places where I think what we talked about a year ago was that everyone is in fast paced. They want to keep people moving. They want to keep the conversation flowing. They want to make sure that nobody's off the sales floor to go take this training. However, now that we've moved a year later and we find ourselves in a pandemic where a lot more people are working remotely, we have a lot of folks that don't have that in your face driver of doing your job in that instant. I think we're actually seeing a lot of our clients and some organizations relax that push towards microlearning. I think it's still something they want, and it is still something I think they should consider, because I don't believe we'll be in this position forever. But we are seeing a request to have longer learning. And I don't mean 30, 45-minute, an hour long learnings, but where the driving mark might have been, let's try to keep it around 3, we're now seeing people drift towards 5, 7, or 8 minutes. And I think that's just an interesting shift as people say, well, they're at home anyway. They don't have maybe the fast-paced environment rushing around them that will be distracting. They can spend more time. And I think that gets away from this notion of what do your learners really want. And we can talk a little bit about that as we move through this and what are some of the pitfalls of getting away from micro learning. But I've seen that trend in the last 12 months where people are more accepting of producing a little longer segment or content out there for their learners to consume. All right, so now that we've kind of recapped what microlearning is and given you a bit of a recap on what we're seeing and what we think, how does this speak to our topic of the day, which is momentum? And we want to kind of introduce a few things that will help drive learners to continue their journey. And one of the things that I think microlearning really does well is instant gratification. We live in a world where we expect results quickly. We expect praise or recognition or even accountability in a timely manner from whenever we act on something or behave in a certain way. And really, microlearning introduces that instant gratification more frequently than traditional learning. Doesn't take a lot of definition to understand that while a traditional learning, let's say, is 10 minutes long or 7 minutes long, at the end of that, you get credit. Whether you pass, fail, you immediately get gratification. If we can break that down and instead of a 7-minute learning, we have 7 1-minute segments, you're being told good job or recognized for your success or held accountable to your opportunities or failures in that session 7 times as often, right? It's happening every minute. Ultimately, we love the flow of serotonin into our brains. We love seeing that sense of accomplishment. And that ultimately drives us to keep going because it gives us another chance to earn that little rush. And that in and of itself can be a huge advantage of microlearning, that it is constantly feeding you with a sense of accomplishment or achievement, one more checklist or check on that checklist. And we all know how much we love to check a box, right? And knock that one thing off of our to-do list or our task list. The more often you do that, the happier you are. Ultimately, there's some brain chemistry there that just tells you that you're doing a good job and that you're making progress.
Progress is and instant gratification is a big part of, I guess, who we are as humans. It's why competition is such a big part of our human nature. It's why any sort of win or victory or success is obviously achieving your goals is obviously a widely accepted or desired feeling. I think that if you think about just, I'm going to simplify it and think about household tasks. And when you have a little chore list to do on the weekend, when you complete each individual task, you always hear the concept of like, why don't you start with the small stuff, because you get those done quickly and it feels like you're making progress, and it wants you to continue down that path of success and completion. I love the concept of microlearning and how it relates to that, like you said, Scott, because um, I love little kind of micro successes or micro goals in the process to allow you to work towards a bigger item, because you don't actually maybe realize that you're actually chugging towards that larger goal, and then you get there and you have a greater level of satisfaction because you put it all together. And one of the ways I've been able to relate this to my coaching in every day. Obviously, always here for a good coaching analogy, is a player may come to me and say, I want to get better at attacking down the flank and swinging in a cross, right? And that may be the task they want to do, but there's so many micro actions on how to do that. So number one, you need to trigger and move wide, right? So maybe the first practice when we're working towards that, we'll say like, every time this occurs, you need to do this, right? And let's measure how many times you successfully do that. And we start to work on these micro tasks. So, hey, they're not actually better at swinging in crosses after practice one, but they achieve 10 little micro successes in that instance. And I think it relates back to that idea of the serotonin, the energy, because they leave practice and say like, oh, I achieved success on that. I completed that task today, and I'm working towards my common goal.
Yeah, we do it with baseball players too, right? If a kid is got the yips or just their swing seems to be off, you don't say, look, here's what's happening. Your hands aren't moving fast enough. You're not balanced. Your feet are out of alignment and your head's pulling out. Like, you don't give them all of that and say, fix all of it at once. You say, all right, we're just going to focus on your feet. So let's get your feet aligned up. Here's how we're going to set ourselves. And they see some pitches on that. And then we say, all right, cool. Now that you've accomplished that, let's talk about your step. And let's keep our balance. We're getting too far out on our front foot, or you're falling out or something like that. And they fix that. And then we fix their hands, and then we fix their shoulders, and then we fix their head. But if you throw all of them at once, it can be a lot, especially, again, 9-year-olds don't maybe cognitively approach it the same way maybe a grown or an adult or high school athlete might. But and so we fix small things, right? Because it's so much easier to grasp that, retain it, and move on to the next thing and build off of it, that you can build some real momentum in that sense from microlearning as well. And again, coaching just being an analogy there. I find it funny when you say the checklist thing, where you start with the small things to kind of build momentum and then finish the large. I actually approach everything the opposite way. I do the long thing first, so that every subsequent task feels like I'm going faster. So I feel like I build my momentum, and then I'm accelerating as I go through my day, even though it's just really that they're smaller and smaller tasks. It's funny that our brains go that way.
And that's a great instance of highlighting how people are different.
100%.
Right. If I use yard work as an example, right? If I know that I have to trim, cut the grass, weed the garden, let's just use those three, right? Weeding the garden probably takes the least amount of time, so I'll just start that. I'll whip out weed the garden, and then I'll go cut the grass afterwards. That's just kind of how I operate. If I wanted to relate what we just mentioned about serotonin and that energy rush to, I guess, my day-to-day in sales, it's breaking down those individual tasks. I don't look at our sales team and say, okay, we need to contact more people. We need to, like, if we're having a lull, because in every sales process, there's always a lull where you go a couple of months, you're not getting as many meetings as you need, right? And it's little tasks. Okay, let's make sure we contact these many people. Let's complete that task. Keep contacting them. Okay, we get email opens, we get link clicks, we do all these things, and it creates momentum, creates energy. And that gets you excited to then pick up the phone and call somebody, or get on the phone and pitch somebody. There's just those little tasks and little kind of injections of experience, we'll say, because they could be in a lot of categories that are going to progress people down the path towards just satisfaction in whatever they're engaged in.
Yeah. And so we can talk about a number of other things, I think, with microlearning that help build momentum too. And I think, we've kind of mentioned sort of the rush that you get of feeling the sense of accomplishment. Microlearning it as a general form for e-learning as well, based on some recent studies, has also shown that it improves engagement rates. So people tend to not only, and whether it's at that result of that rush or just the preference for that style, you get roughly a jump from about a 15% engagement rate with longer term traditional learnings. Again, probably because people get into it. They may lose interest partway through. They may get distracted. They may get pulled in another direction. But that jumps to 90% with microlearning. And a lot of that probably has to do with just the duration, right? It's much easier to knock out a series of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 minute e-learnings as opposed to much larger ones, without the world kind of rushing at you and just getting in your way. So you do see higher engagement rates typically from microlearning. And then this is one study that and you'll see variations on it. So we're not going to get into the specifics of the numbers because I think a number of studies will throw a lot of different numbers at you, but they all tend to tell you the same punchline, if you will, at the end of the study, which is just that attention spans are going down over time. So from 2000 to 2015, you saw about a 30% reduction in overall attention span rates, which can be just how long you're willing to focus on something before, again, the world gets in your face. And there's a lot of content going on. Microlearning helps reduce that fatigue that would let people go the other direction, right? So if we can acknowledge at least that attention spans are declining on some level for probably a number of variables, microlearning helps capture their attention longer, which helps ultimately in their retention rates. So we've covered off on what is microlearning, maybe some of what the benefits are or why we've gotten there. I thought it'd be fun because I think from a client perspective, Daniel and I have probably had this conversation with ourselves, but also with clients and internally and externally everywhere. This is the great debate of microlearning. And I thought we'd introduce it and then we can kind of dialogue back and forth about what we think. So I'll just set the stage really fast. So typically what we have when we have this conversation with clients around microlearning, the general prevailing thought is it's great that you want to chunk up my 1 10-minute e-learning into 10 1-minute e-learnings, but that's going to create volume on my LMS. And it's just going to look like a lot. And so how do you have that conversation with people to say, it doesn't matter whether it's 1 10-minute e-learning or 10 1-minute e-learnings, it's still 10 minutes of content. And a lot of it can be the way you frame it. So that is a conversation we have a lot of is, yeah, but you're just making a lot of content and that's going to fatigue people too. And maybe it does. Daniel, when you've had this conversation, like what are some things that you tend to talk about with the client?
I mean, there's let's talk about the external factors. I know we've talked about systems and things. So we'll talk about the external factors first. There's a few reasons why microlearning can be a poor strategy, and I'll start there. Number one, if you don't have a good path and incentivization strategy and a process strategy, curriculum strategy around a bunch of content may actually reduce the amount of completions you get because of systems. The other thing is some of your systems that you guys have may actually charge more per content item that you host on the platform. So that would also be a bad experience for you financially. So there are those. But what I would recommend is, and those are things, I guess, hiccups that we come across. The biggest one that comes up, Scott, is exactly what you said. Volume. How does that create is it intimidating when someone goes to a achievement or a curriculum or a certificate that they need to complete and they see 10 pieces of content and they rather than one? And our recommendation always is transparency is key. So number one is upfront, tell the learners what they're having to engage in and how long it's going to take them. Number one. But number two, less is actually more. By no means when they go through the process do they have to go through and take them all at once. They actually get to go in and focus their time and energy on a single learning objective at a time instead of reading a course, going in and seeing like after this module, you'll need to be able to do A, B, C, D, and E. They can go in and say, after this module or after this training, you'll be able to do A. And it's always a less is more approach. And that's the way we always talk about it is get them to focus in on one thing. If we think about sales training, the one key feature in sales factor. If it's process training, the one key what's in it for me or takeaway, and then kind of work off of those things. So it's really is a less is more style strategy for me, from a information base, right? Yes, there's more pieces of content, but the information in each is less, which allows you to focus in on what you're consuming.
Yeah, and I think you hit the big nail on the head, if you will. Is it really is about keeping the objective simple, and letting learners really focus intently on one topic, which ultimately will help improve retention, things like that. For me, the one thing I always tell every client is a move to microlearning is never just the flip of a switch. It's not. And so that initial hesitancy to create volume in terms of count of content in your system is natural. I think that that can seem a bit daunting, but one, are you communicating effectively and change managing people to think differently about the way you're going to roll out content? If you just start throwing a bunch of content out there where traditionally it's been 10 minutes, they're going to think everything is still 10 minutes. Are you communicating, hey, look, here's some new concepts we're going for, and making sure you're managing that change with your users? Number two, I wouldn't recommend changing your entire catalog at one time. That will look daunting. Hey, we had a catalog of 50 items. Now we have a catalog of 500 items. That creates some mental barriers, I think, for a lot of your learners. Take it one step at a time, evaluate trainings on an individual basis, and sort of work towards that. I think your learning culture will be a part of that as well. Like, how do you approach getting people excited about learning as an organization? All of those things come to play in terms of people adapting and adopting the microlearning platform. After that, I like numbers, right? So that'll be where I want to focus next, is like, what are some of the advantages that come from it, and maybe that overwrites the volume. But Daniel, you maybe had something to say there. I cut you
Yeah,
off.
no problem. I was going to say is going back to the last segment, like we talked about satisfaction, right? So when you go through a long task, and we're all guilty of this, right? We read blogs, we read books, we read information, from a knowledge perspective. We tend to have a base level of satisfaction or information we want to acquire. So, for example, if I'm in sales, and I keep using sales as the example because I'm in sales, but if you well, no matter what training I take, and it could be a mix of product knowledge and how to sell it all in one, right? My job is to sell the product. So the information I'm going to extract from that is how to sell the product, right? And maybe I'm missing out on a lot of base level product knowledge that is going to also accentuate the sale after the fact, rather than just the sales techniques. So mentally, we're gonna take the minimum viable amount of information from a piece of content, from a blog. If you think about people nowadays with headline reading, right? They're they're taking the minimum amount of information to seem knowledgeable and to be able to have a conversation around a topic. And that's one of the concerns with what we deal with today with longer information. So they're going to take that to be satisfied. So just another point to add on what you mentioned, Scott, is when you break those up, there's only one thing for someone to focus on, and they can take the minimum amount of viable information or takeaway or objective from that microlearning is what needs to be learned at that time and retained, rather than navigating through all the waters and just picking out the one thing that the learner thinks is important.
For sure. I think all of that is a great approach that helps people understand sort of your learning strategy, what's going to happen, how to approach that. A couple things that just on the topic of momentum, as we keep bringing that up, and the way microlearning can help. One thing to consider as well when you think about a microlearning strategy is that learners tend to have a forgetting curve, right? We probably haven't mentioned that frequently, at least not recently. But the idea that you learn something today, you're going to remember less and less over time, and there's usually a pretty steep drop off at some point, depending on the content. The idea of microlearning, and Daniel mentioned, is that I don't have to take it all today, so I don't have to consume everything in this moment in this one learning, but I can spread it out. Well, that actually helps with spaced repetition in terms of learning. Is that I learn a little bit today, and then I come back to it tomorrow, and I continue on that concept. That actually helps me retain what I learned yesterday, and then I take a little bit more the next day, which helps me retain what I learned the next 2 days, and that forgetting curve smooths out, and ultimately isn't that sharp drop off of retention, but ultimately I'm going to retain that longer. Now, again, if I continue to keep dropping micro learnings in along the way over a course of a 30, 60, 90-day period, my retention actually can stay pretty consistent across the board without having that drop off or losing a lot of information, because I'm constantly reinforcing that message, helping you remember to bring back past learning in application or in scenario based. So microlearning has an advantage there in terms of long-term retention. And that can be a huge benefit to the organization as well, to just think this is a reinforcement model as well, as people build on concepts. So something to consider there is that that can help reduce fatigue in learning and help with retention of the overall content itself.
Come on, get happy.
I love the concept of microlearning. It's always a popular debate and a common topic that we have with everyone. So hopefully today's episode uh, helps people think a little bit about it and the way it can help drive your learners to have greater motivation and momentum to keep them moving in their learning journey. Again, we're going to talk about momentum a lot over the course of this month. But realistically, microlearning is a great starting point. Daniel got to say the word objectives, which I feel like for quite a few episodes he hasn't really had that opportunity or hasn't injected that into the conversation. So it was good to have it back. I think it makes a lot of sense specifically in this topic, but a lot of good conversation. So really looking forward to continuing this momentum as we move into all of our other episodes. You see what I did there? All right, nice. With that being said, we wrap up every show with the positivity, a little excitement and energy, something fun we saw from this week to lighten and brighten your days. For me, obviously, it was Star Wars Day, which I love. It's my wife, I wore it out pretty heavily. She was very fatigued, speaking of fatigue and what you can do to someone by the end of the day. But my favorite thing I saw yesterday, and I saw a lot of fun things, the internet was abuzz with all the Star Wars, was we were watching baseball last night on ESPN. We were watching the Yankees and the Astros play. And that's kind of my kids this time of the year. They always want to, that's their wind down going into bed as we watch some baseball. And they're not always happy about what teams are playing. But last night, the entire announcing booth was done up in really, really bad Halloween costumes for Star Wars. So there was one of the guys, Eduardo Perez was as Chewbacca. And then my personal favorite when it comes to almost any sports broadcaster, I think, but specifically for baseball, is Tim Kurkjian. He had this terrible Yoda mask on, and it was causing him to have trouble breathing because it was so poorly made, and his headphones wouldn't fix, and he had to have producers in getting him all set. And he had a great notion, and he has said this in a number of interviews. He takes his job very seriously, but he doesn't take himself super seriously. And I think we can have more of that in our lives, that we can be professional and we can have a lot of energy and passion around what we do. But it's a good life lesson not to take yourself too seriously. Have some fun and enjoy what you do as well. And I loved the message, but I love that they did it while having this goofy Star Wars rubber mask on as well. So a good time. Even back in studio, I think Reese Davis, if I remember, it might have been Steve Levy, had on a full Darth Vader outfit. And I guess, again, Star Wars, Disney owns ESPN, not surprising. Erica's like, why are they doing this? My wife. I'm like, because it's a Disney program and they own Star Wars. So anytime they can sell some merch, I'm sure they're shooting for it. But a lot of fun. I'm glad they embraced it and had a good time with it.
That's awesome. No, I would like to, before I hop into my positivity point for the day, I'd like to reverse my positivity point from last week. So I did say last week I was going to be in a new environment this week. Contractors and I are not friends currently because they should have been done today and they're not. But they're saying end of the week. So that's positive. And hopefully next week I'll be able to follow through on my promise. That being said, my positivity point for today is really just about the time of year. Like I said, this week's interesting. Dog's my mom's birthday, big mama's boy over here, and then obviously Mother's Day, which is an exciting time. But really, it's that line in the sand. May 1st is that line in the sand in Windsor, Essex County, which is where Sabrina and I are, where the weather completely turns. It's now consistently spring. Weather is good. Sun is typically shining. The whole, April showers bring May flowers is a pretty prevalent here where we are. Get to spend more time outside. As you know, I think I said this last year around this time, I've become a lawn dad. So a little extra yard work, but just enjoying the time of year. enjoying kind of getting outside. And then it's also this mental time where now soccer season, which I didn't have last year, soccer season at the university is like 4 months away. It's here now. Like Labor Day weekend's 4 months away. The 90-day mark is kind of like becomes a panic, but this whole like May is really a nice, like, oh yeah, that's coming soon. We're kind of in the thick of things. Summer's around the corner. Just a good time of year. I'm buzzing with positivity today.
I dig it. Spring, summer, it's all here. Nashville's getting hot and humid. Summer must be right around the corner, so it's coming. Yeah, lots going on this week. So May the 4th have been with you for those that are Star Wars fans. Hopefully everyone enjoyed a happy Cinco de Mayo. And that will do it for us today. For all the mothers out there, happy Mother's Day this weekend. Hopefully you get to enjoy it, and your husbands, kids are doing some nice things for you. You greatly deserve it. We will talk to you next week.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.